Navionics likes to do, Navionics will take the recordings that we make from all of these webinars and they will put them up for free for you to watch for the rest of the year um, on their YouTube channel. And all of you who signed up will get automatic updates. So you get an email from Navionics that'll have that information for you. And it'll also be posted on their Facebook page and on their YouTube channel, usually within about a week to 2 weeks. So if you have to roll out for some reason, not to worry. This is being recorded, and you will have the opportunity to watch it at your leisure anywhere you'd like. Okay, so let's see if what I paid for Microsoft is actually going to work again. You got it, Fred. My pleasure. All right, Frog and Dirty. Tips and strategies for fishing frogs. I have been fishing tournaments for a few years. All of the larger fish that I have caught, the biggest bass that I've caught in my tournament careers have all come on frogs. Um, some of that's forced because I enjoy them so much. Some of that is because of the very nature of this bait and what it's capable of doing. This is a big fish bait. Those of you who are tournament fishermen now, or even just, or people who are starting to get into tournament fishing, or even the guys I like fishing with the most, people who just really love to be on the water and just love to be challenging themselves and go out there and catching fish as much as possible. Frogs are a part of your arsenal that cannot be overlooked. So what we're going to talk about while we're here today, our goals and objectives for our seminar. I want to talk to you probably the simplest tackle section I've ever gone over, the rod, the reels, and the line. I said it's rods and reels, but I pretty much only use one setup when I am frog fishing. And then we're going to go over the frogs that I'll use in tournament fishing and why I use them. So that'll be the Spro popping frog, the standard Spro bronze eye frog, my all-time favorite frog that a lot of people haven't heard of or haven't used, and I think you will after this, the Evolved Nervous Walker, the Depths Bassariski, the Optimum Baits Furbit, the Optimum Baits Furbit Popper, and then the Live Target frog. And then we're going to discuss the when, the where, and the why. But it's going to be very important to go over the different frogs. I mean, that seems like a lot. It's really not. I don't get real crazy with colors, and I'll explain that why. But I have very simple ideas for how I want to run things and where I want them to go. And as a result, that's not a whole lot of frogs. There's only one box. At least that's what I tell my wife. All right, so here we go with our poll question. If you would just take a minute to answer this, how confident are you with fishing a frog? Because it gives me kind of an idea of where we're at. All right, let me give about 5 more seconds. 89% of you have voted just as I love the 21% that says it's my game, baby, because I'm right there with you guys. This is kind of what I like to do. Um, but I'm real happy to see that most of you guys have either been using them for some time, never tried, or just started, and that's kind of who we're going to be geared towards with what we discuss. I hope some of you that are going to be um, some of our more advanced guys with It's My Game. I hope that you learn a little something from me today. And if you have a question, please hit me up or put it out there for the group. All you have to do is click on the question area. You can type something in. It'll notify me, and if I'm paying attention, which I try to, usually I'm doing this because I can pretty much talk everybody's ears off. I will be more than happy to answer it. But please go right ahead and let me know what we got going on. So it looks like we got bumped out of our actual, oh, there we go. All right, so why do we use frogs? Well, the frog is a big fish producer. Frogs can produce some very violent strikes. The real reasons why I think I like them. I think a lot of people that I know that fish frogs like them is that it's a very sight-oriented bait. It's not a chuck and wind. It's not something, like you're dragging a Senko through a grass bed. It's target oriented. You throw it out. You have to keep an eye on your frog to see what's going on with it, and it requires you to be very involved in your fishing to impart a lot of action on your frog. So it keeps your interest. It keeps you piqued. Typically, when you are interested and you're somewhat piqued while things are going on. You do better. You have better results because you're more tuned in. Now, I'm going to show you a video. This video I'm getting to show is from my practice for the first Northern Rayovac of last year on the James River. This was my Wednesday practice, excuse me, my Tuesday practice. The tournament started on Thursday, and I used frogs a lot in grass beds as search baits. Typically, if you let a bass take the fish down, if something comes up and pops your frog, if you don't put any pressure on it, they'll spit it out pretty well. This was a situation, and you'll see here in a minute. And the video is going to start, and I'll explain what's going on as it's moving. Here we go. That was a little area that I was fishing in the James, and any of you guys are from Virginia, it probably looks familiar to you. And I had a fish take a frog down pretty much in this little, yeah, big fish. I'm telling everybody, this area back here. And here I am kind of freaking out because this thing was a pretty big fish. And when it hit it, I tried to let it go, but this fish didn't want to have anything to do with letting this frog go, and it kind of hooked himself. So you can see right here, this big ball of goo and grass, that is the bass that I took on a frog. That frog was the evolved nervous walker frog, which is my all-time favorite. I was very fortunate to have discovered it, but I'm kind of, as I'm walking around here, I'm looking around and seeing if there's any other of my competitors watching me because I know this is a big fish. And there I am dragging it back, and here's where I kind of make a mistake here. Okay, I pulled all the grass off his face and he starts going nuts. Now there he is. All right, is everybody seeing the presentation okay? I just got a message from one attendee that they're not Paul Ferry. Paul, you're still not able to see this? Okay, good. Good. Paul, other people are saying they can see it okay. Okay, good. Um, See what you can come up with, Paul, trying to get this to work out a little better. But if you can't, just if you want to listen to the audio, that'd be fine. Or just continue to ask questions, and then I know that it's being recorded, so we'll be able to pass it out the YouTube link for you, so you can watch it at a later time. When you watch that video, guys, there's a couple of mistakes I made. Number one, um, didn't have the camera turned on before I got started, but I really wasn't trying to fish for any. I wasn't trying to make any videos that day or do anything crazy. Number two, and it kind of got a little caught up there, but you can see when I dragged this fish to the boat um, initially, he was covered in grass, and the first thing I did before I brought him in the boat, because I really didn't realize how big he was I pulled the grass off of his face. That is a mistake. If you got a large fish or any fish that you're trying to keep in that boat and he's covered in grass, get him in the boat first, and then go ahead and then take the grass off of his face. Um, because for whatever reason, when grass are covered in big bass, or excuse me, when bass are covered in a lot of grass, they will pretty much think that they're safe. They will kind of go into like almost like a shutdown mode, like, oh my gosh, you can't see me. They don't know, we don't know what's going on. The minute you pop it off them, they panic and they flip out. So that's why that fish jumped so much at the side of the boat. It was my mistake. That's just a little something for you guys to take into your tournament fishing or your regular fishing. If you want to keep that fish and he's covered in grass, get him into the boat with all the grass, then take it off so you don't lose him at the side of the boat, because losing that guy would have been bad. Now, of course, I'm sure one of you are wondering, how did I do in the tournament after finding a spot that held a fish? I'd been there for about 5 minutes when I hit that guy, and I left it alone. When I went back there on day one, I had that whole grass bed to myself with the exception of one other angler. And that one other angler read that read the conditions a little better than I did, and rather than fish in the grass, just fished it just outside on the edge. And he took a 9 pounder. He had a 9.2, and I believe that was the big bass for the entire tournament that day. So I had a good place to catch big fish. I just didn't really execute that day. Okay, so my tackle setup. I use one setup for all of my frog fishing, and one alone, and it's a 7.3 medium heavy all-purpose rod from Fitzgerald Rods. Now, a lot of you are going, holy geez, I can't believe he just said medium heavy. Yes, I say medium heavy. I encourage everyone to fish with a softer tip rod. A lot of companies will make a rod that is designed specifically for frog fishing, and most of them to a T will have a very soft tip to them. I know Denali's got a frog rod that's very good, and it's built with a real soft tip and a good backbone. But the Fitzgerald rod is the lightest, easiest to cast, and almost unbreakable rod that I've ever used. I joined Fitzgerald. That was at the end of last year, at the end of the season, trying to get over my sponsors for the new year. And it's probably been the best thing that I've done, the best change that I've made, just because for whatever reason the taper and design of these rods fit my casting style perfectly. I use a 7-to-3-to-1 Daiwa Tathala reel. I use a high speed reel simply because when you toss a frog and you're doing a lot of topwater action, you're going to have a lot of slack in your line from time to time. So when that fish finally pops up and takes that frog down, you are going to need to pick up a lot of line in a hurry. Also, anyone who's frog fished from some time will tell you that it's very easy for the fish to come take the frog and then for you to just yank it right out of its mouth. And when that happens, you're going to need to get your frog back to you quickly so you can throw it right back in there and hopefully elicit a second strike. And we're going to talk about the 4-second rule here in a little bit for guiding you as to whether or not it's worth throwing right back into that same area. I use minimum 65-pound to 80-pound braid. I use Sunline FX. I don't have a line sponsor. I don't want a line sponsor. I want to be able to use whatever lines that I want to use. That Sunline FX line, to me, is the most durable. It's the easiest to cast, and it does not have a lot of residue that comes off when you use it over time. I know there's a lot of lines out there that once you start running it through the guides and you're running it through the line guide and your reel, that some of the coating will come off, cover your hands and cover your reel in green. It doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't make it any less effective, but it just gets messy. And for the Sunline rod, I don't have that rod now, that problem. Now, also when you have some line that's losing its coating going through your guides, that is friction, that is slowing down your line, which is then minimizing your cast. So I use Sunline. I pay full price for it, and I think it's worth every single penny. That is the only rod setup that I'll use. And when I'm going to go frog fishing, I will have 2 rods set up at all times to frog fish. One of them will have some type of popping frog on it, depending upon where I'm fishing and what area of the country I'm in. And the other one will have a non-popping frog on it. And because I don't like to, if I'm going to frog fish, I'm going to commit to it for a good time. And when I'm trying to figure out what the fish want or which one's being more effective, I don't want to waste time sitting there trying to retie. I will just I'll throw the exact same rod, the exact same setup, the exact same line, and just 2 different baits. That way I can switch back and forth with ease. Now, choosing a frog, the how and the why of how we're going to do this. That picture to our right is from one of the probably the greatest fishing lake in the world right now, and that is Lake Guntersville, and that is a Guntersville grass bed with a lot of options to it, as you can see. Guntersville is known for frog fishing, as well as for fishing around the bridges in February when Randy Howell won the Bassmaster Classic. But things that we want to consider when we choose a frog, how and why. We're going to talk about the color of the frog we're going to use. You're going to find I got a pretty simple rule when it comes to color. I don't like to overcomplicate things. I'm not that intelligent. We're going to talk about how wind is going to help us make a choice because wind's going to do some things to the water. The depth of the water that we're fishing, the water clarity in the area that we're getting ready to fish, what type of structure, whether it be hardwood, docks, grass, lily pads, and really what we have confidence in. Confidence is going to be a big thing when it comes to frog fishing, guys, just simply because you're going to be sitting there and sometimes you may go an hour without even seeing anything come up and even sniff that bait. And if you're going to frog fish effectively and if you're going to need to commit to it, you're going to have some confidence that, hey, for whatever reason, they're just not turned on to it right now. It's a little more understandable when you fish the places that I fish. I fish a lot of tidal fisheries, and tidal fisheries are very, very tuned into uh, what stage the tide is in. And sometimes you'll only have a 30 or 40-minute window where they'll be biting, and then it'll be 4 or 5 hours before they hit again. It can be nerve wracking. But if you're patient and you have confidence in what you're doing and what you're throwing, it can be extremely rewarding as well. So we'll just get right into it. Choosing a frog with color. The big thing for me when I choose any frog is there has to be some type of color breakup on the underbelly of the frog. I do not like a plain bottom for the most part, especially with a hollow belly. Um, and I like to have something to make the pattern break up. The reason I like this is it looks more natural. The photo that you see on the right there is the evolved nervous walker frog. Then what they did, and the only reason why I picked this frog up and even threw it to begin with, is because of that bottom pattern. I would used to buy my Spros, and I would buy other companies, and I would take just a black magic marker and make my own patterns on the bottom. But that wasn't as durable, and it had kind of a chemically smell to it. The evolved nervous walker has that pattern on it. I it just it looks real well. One thing we know about with nature, particularly nature, is that there's always some irregularity. Nothing's ever perfect, and nothing is ever just one single color. So I think that for me, that's a huge key. I wish I could take credit for that, coming up with that, but there's a couple of guys that taught me how to frog fish that was their thing, and I just something that I happen to believe in. When it comes to what the top color is, I really don't have too many preferences. You want to choose a color that you can easily find when fishing. So if it's overcast and cloudy day, that we actually that's what you want when you fish topwater because the fish are a little bit more bold. Um, you just make sure it's a color that you can see. I use white. If you're a beginning frog fisherman, my suggestion to you would be to use a white frog, a white up top, or a really bright neon color frog. And the reason for that is going to be you need to see that frog even when it goes underwater to see if the fish is just pulling at its legs or if it has completely disappeared and now it's time to set that hook. Um, the other color that I'll use is if I'm not using a white or bright, is this going to be an all black frog? I don't really care what's up on top as far as patterns concerned. I don't think that the fish see the top of the frog at all before they smack it. Sometimes when the frog flips over in the water, they might, but I don't really think that bass will come up and look at it and go, well, clearly there's no spots on the top of this thing, so that must be just the live target frog, so I'm not going to hit it. I use black and usually in high sun, it just creates a better, I can see it well, and it really makes for a good silhouette on for the bass coming up underneath. The only exception that I'm going to really have to it, and there's going to be with every rule and anything we do, especially in fishing, there's always an exception, particularly when you're dealing with nature. In the fall, when you have the big shad blowout before these guys will before bass will hole up for the winter time, I will throw shad colored frogs when I see them feeding on dying gizzard shad or schools of threadfin in the shallows. I will then switch to a shad color or even a bluegill color. But that's usually a fall bite. When we talk with wind, Generally, just like with everyone's heard the rule that if it's windy and there's a lot of chop on the water and you throw a spinnerbait, well, you can pretty much use that same theory with your frog fishing. That when there's wind or there's chop on the water, it's usually better to throw a popping frog. And the reasons for that is that it's easier for the bass to find when that bass is looking up and there's a lot of chop on the water. Uh, it breaks up the light and it does not make for easy viewing for them. So you want to make it as easy possible for them. So throw that popping frog, gives a little bit more noise. It's got a little bit more of a silhouette. It creates greater rings. The bass is going to find it easier. Um, Another kind of advantage with the popping frog is that you can leave it in a single area for just a little bit longer. As soon as you pull it, it's got some resistance to it on the water because the face of that is cupped, designed to pop. Um, so you can hit it a couple times and it's only going to move an inch or two, whereas with a walking frog, it actually might move a foot. When it comes to a smooth water surface or no wind, choose whatever you want. Like I said, I have two rods strung up at all times. I will have I'll have a popper and then I'll have a walking frog, and I'll just keep throwing one or the other until I get a bite, and they let them tell me. I prefer the walking frog over a popping frog just because of the areas that I fish are usually heavily padded, and I think that a walking frog is easier to pull through pads because it doesn't have that flat face. But you choose whatever one you want to. But if there is some wind, if there's a lot of current, and you got a lot of chop on water, go ahead and go with the popping frog. It's just going to make it easier. When it comes to depth, I don't really think depth is that big of a factor, but you got to know your quarry. So what I mean by that is most of the time if you're fishing a frog, you're fishing something shallow. The only time that you might switch that up is if, again, we're in the fall, we've got some schooling fish, they're popping up top. There's absolutely no reason why you can't throw a shad-colored frog to them and have a lot of success. So while there's not a lot of frogs in open 20 feet plus of water, that's what you're going to fish, don't throw a leopard-colored frog. Throw something that looks like a shad, and you'll have better success. On the flip side of that, when you're fishing depth, do not be afraid to literally throw a frog up onto the bank and then drag it off the bank into the water. You would not believe how shallow bass will go for a meal that is as large and as protein filled for them as a frog. And you kind of want to make these things act like they're real anyway. So if you got a chance to throw up on a rock or throw up on a lay down or even throw it up onto the top of a dock and then pull it off and have it hop into the water almost like a real frog would, you're kind of showing the bass that this is something real. So it's never a mistake to do that. When it comes to water clarity, just like with high chop on the water that reduces visibility, if you have very dirty water, I suggest throwing a popping frog. It's going to be a lot easier for that bass to find. I would also, in dirty water, throw black. It's just going to give you a bigger profile, so that bass should be able to, again, find it a little bit more quickly. And then when you have choppy water or you have dirty water, really slow down your presentation. There's a wonderful article that you guys can Google where Randall Tharp, Florida fisherman, talks about fishing frogs and how will let frogs sometimes sit for 30 seconds before he even moves them. And that is an amazing amount of patience. So again, he's one of the better frog fishermen in the country, along with Dean Rojas. But if you think that you're going slow, try to wait another 5 seconds next time and see what happens. And it's all going to be. This is part of the fun of fishing with the frog, is trying to figure out what patterns work and when and how far you can push the limit. So it's kind of fun. When it comes to structure, I prefer, like I told you before, I prefer a walking hollow belly frog, like a Live Target, the Evolve, or a Furbit from Optimum around pads. And that's just a very simple reason, that the flat face, that cupped face of a popping frog, when you're pulling it through heavy lily pads or spatter dock or whatever it is you have in your area of the country, that flat face tends to get caught more in the pads themselves, in the stalks themselves, whereas a pointed nose one will just come through a little bit easier. That's it. That's the only reason why I prefer that. In heavy grass, I also prefer a walking frog because you can kind of scoot it and almost porpoise it across the top, and it looks very realistic. But you really have to kind of take the look at the totality of the circumstances in which you are fishing in and combine all those factors together to make your decision. So you look at water clarity, you look at the chop, you look at the structure you're throwing around, even under docks. That's another great thing about frogs, guys, is frogs are very easy to skip, because they're hollow, because they're plastic, because they're cupped. They almost look like little skipping rocks to begin with. Very easy for you to just go ahead and toss that underneath a dock where a frog actually might be hanging out in real life. So combine all those factors together. Real simple program to do that, guys. Have 2 frog rods ready, 1 popper, one walker, and just go to town. And then confidence, guys. You have to throw. If this is really aimed for tournament fishermen, never try a new bait on the first day of your tournament. If you didn't get to use it in practice, I would really strongly suggest that you don't use it during the tournament. Now, I'm sure that there's plenty of people out there that can give examples of a bait that they were handed that morning by one of their buddies and said, hey, just try this, and it happened to work. But when it comes to frogs, because you may go for quite some time without having a bite, and because this is really a big fish attractor, which means some of your smaller guys might not hit it. Although I really haven't found anything that bass won't hit yet. But again, you have to have confidence. And if you're going to go for 5 fish with a frog, you're going to have to know that you might just have 5 bites, but they're all going to be big bites. And that's kind of my theory when I'm using frogs in a tournament is I may only have 5 or 3 to 5 fish, but I'm going for 3 fish that are going to beat most people's 5 fish. That's what I'm attempting to do, because it's not about numbers. It's about having the biggest weight for your check. The other thing I'm going to caution you with when you're choosing frogs, and you're of value. There's every company makes a frog out there. There's 10,000 of them. I haven't really found a bad one yet, but you want to be careful and you want to watch out for what I call a suicide frog, and that is a frog that, by its design, the hooks themselves sometimes can be a little bit too close to the body or pointed in towards the body, so that as it gets used during the course of your day, within the first couple of casts, those hooks will start hooking the frog itself and puncturing a hole into the frog. That's what we call a suicide frog. That's a frog that's going to get torn up fast, and that's a frog if the hooks keep penetrating into the top of the frog itself, and you're not checking it often, or even if you are checking it, but just keeps doing it, then the next time you can have a very good sized bass come up, hit that frog, and that hook will be embedded in the plastic of the frog itself. And when you go to set the hook, it's just going to slide out of the fish's mouth. So be on the lookout for suicide frogs. And then squeeze the water out of frogs often. Every frog is pretty much going to get water in it, with the exception of that ischius fat frog from Snag Proof. But just squeeze the water out often, because if you keep the water in there, it'll cause it'll cause it to sit down. Now, for your more advanced guys, you may want to do that sometimes. You may want it to sit a little bit more heavy in the water. But for beginners, and for people that are just starting to gain some confidence, squeeze out often, so the frog will act the way that it was designed to. I didn't talk about this at all in my presentation. A lot of guys will have asked, hey, do you ever throw rattles into your frogs? No, I don't. I let the action impart my response from the fish. I don't really worry about the sound of it for the most part. I know some guys that do, and they have success with it. Just for me, the less moving parts and the less manipulation that I'm doing to things, the simpler it is for me. And all of these designs are designed by the manufacturers to be fished as is, and it's usually they usually have done some pretty good testing with them, so I try to leave them alone. Alrighty, so let's get into the frogs I like to use. First, Spro Poppin' Frog. This is a great overall frog. It's got a lot of the characteristics that I described to you earlier, as far as having some good underbelly color to it, good color options. It's a very good size. They make 2 different sizes. They got a popping junior, and they got a standard popper. You can, if you're fishing pressured fish, or you're fishing around finicky fish, my first piece of advice to you would be to downsize with every bait that you have. Downsize, downsize, downsize. And you can downsize with your frog as well. So you've got some options of the Spro. One thing I'll tell you is I think the Spro poppers, the legs are too long. I don't like long legs. It encourages fish to target the legs rather than the body itself. They can get caught up on themselves. And I just find that it's easier for me to walk a bait or manipulate a bait with slightly shorter legs. And the Spros are a little long, so I will immediately take a Spro frog and cut the last, or cut an inch off of both of the legs to make it a little shorter. It makes it a little bit easier to manipulate, to turn for me. Um, you can also do some other tricks with it where you cut one and not the other, and that'll have some drag on one side and it'll kind of make it look like it's an injured frog. But for the most part, I just cut them 1 inch shorter and move forward. It sits. This is a pretty high sitting frog, and it makes a great noise when you actually plunk it. It kind of makes like a bloop noise, which is what you're looking for. And you can fish this slow or fast. It can't go too fast with it. It kind of gets overwhelmed a little bit. But if you're using a popping frog, you're not trying to go fast. You're trying to just throw a pop up and have it move. Now, one thing I will tell you about all frog fishing that I do, I will not manipulate a frog at all. Once it's thrown, I will let it hit the water, and I won't move it until all of the rings have dissipated and I can no longer see them. I like to give that first initial drop. I want to make it look like it's a stunned animal, and I want to let everyone in the area know that it's coming. And I want all the bass to know that, hey, to be able to find it. So when it hits the water that first time, I want everybody to be able to turn their heads and be looking for it. And then when it starts to move, and that's when I want the aggression to start. If I found that a lot of times I've seen a lot of people will throw a frog, it'll hit the water and they'll immediately start removing it. Well, the fish hasn't had a time to find it yet. Remember, before you throw that thing, that fish is just down there hanging out the bottom of the lily pad stalk or a piece of structure, and it's just kind of chilling out. And particularly in grass beds or pad fields, if you don't give it time to find the bait, it's probably not going to. So when you throw that frog out there, let it sit for a second so it can feel the vibration, it can see the ripples, it'll start looking up, and that's when you start moving that frog around. Spro bronzeye frog is the little brother or the flat nose version of that spro popping frog. And again, this is a good frog. I'll do the exact same manipulation to this that I would do to the popper. I'll cut that at least 1 inch off both legs because I just like to have them a little bit shorter. It's small enough to be effective when you're looking for numbers of fish, or if you're fishing pressured fish. Again, it's got two sizes. Neither one of them is particularly big, but it's a good frog for picking up numbers. And it's again got a variety of really good colors that you can have, from different species of frogs to different species of bait fish. It's a good this frog will take on water, so you do have to kind of squeeze it out. And it for whatever reason, I find that the Spro bronzeye sits a little low in the water. But it's a very, very good frog. And I definitely will. I've always got him in the boat. Let's put it that way. This frog, however, is the one that I tried just because I happened to look at the package and see that it already had exactly what I wanted in the bottom contour or the bottom color, and that was that it had a white belly with a bunch of black spots on it. And I have come to love this frog. This is from Evolve Baits. It's called the Nervous Walker. This frog, you can literally turn this frog 180 degrees in the water and only have it move forward about 1/2 inch, which I find is very, very unique, a very unique design. I don't know what they did or how the belly of it actually makes that happen, but I don't care. It does it, and I'm happy. As you can see, the legs on this are much shorter than the legs on a Spro bronzeye frog. I don't have to do any manipulation to this frog whatsoever. The body of this frog is also very, very pliable, very soft. It's much softer than the Spro frog. And that's not to say that the Spro frog is bad, but this is very, very soft. And what that means for you and I is that when the bass takes it, it does not take as much pressure to push the plastic body of the frog down and expose the hooks, which means higher hookup ratios. And when you saw from that video this was the green version of this is what I caught that fish on the James with, and you saw how buried it was back in the top of his mouth. That is exactly what you want. While it has shorter legs than the Spro, it's got a larger body than the Spro, so it's going to attract bigger bass for you. It's going to have a bigger profile in the water for you. Bigger baits make big fish. I mean, if you want to catch a pig, you got to throw a jig. I'm sure everybody's heard that for you. Well, if you want to catch bigger bass, you want to with a frog, you throw a bigger bodied frog. But there's a trade-off. You will get fewer looks. You'll get fewer bites. But the ones that you do get, are going to generally be bigger fish. It's like the difference between throwing a 6-inch Senko and a 5-inch Senko. You can catch a lot of fish with a 5-inch Senko, and I've catched quite a couple of checks on a 5-inch Senko, but you will catch bigger fish, a bigger class of fish on the 6-inch Senko. This won't be as much, and that can be somewhat nerve-wracking because when you're not catching them, you tend to question what's going on. Another nice thing about the Evolve is it doesn't really take on a whole lot of water. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time squeezing it out in between casts. You can just pick it up and let it go, pick it up and let it go. They don't have a popping version of this yet. I'm fine with that. I think that this is far and away the best frog on the market, and it's not terribly expensive. I don't remember what it costs, but I want to say it's like $7.99, $8.99. They're available at Tackle Warehouse. They're available locally here in Virginia at Green Top. At least I think that they were at one point. But good frog, and I do not have any sponsorship deals with these guys at all. I just fish this frog because I love it. So give this frog a shot, guys. I think you're going to like the way that the action that it has, particularly how tight you can walk this frog with minimal effort. Now the Furbit frog from Optimum Baits is a very unique frog in that they don't use rubber legs; they use rabbit fur. And if anybody's got any experience with fly fishing, then you'll be familiar with rabbit fur because rabbit fur, once it hits the water, and rabbit strip actually with some hair coming off it, is extremely lifelike. Once these legs hit the water and they become saturated, all those little hairs start to move, and it looks very, very natural. It looks very, very lifelike. It's like an actual living frog. You can also see that both of them have a spinner that's removable off the back end of it. I've never removed them, although you can. And it's it's just another added stimulus that we're throwing to these fish. So if you want to walk this fast, it's going to be dragging this blade and flashing for you at the same time. Now, I know the question here, do frogs ever flash? No, they don't. But bass, as intelligent as they are also pretty stupid and curious. So when they see something flashing, they're going to come up and hit it. This is a great still water and water current frog. And why I say that is in still water, when you got not a lot going on, the rabbit fur will move all on its own. It'll just kind of flop up and down and look very, very lifelike. In current, like out here, if we were to fish the Potomac and I was fishing a current line, that current will move these legs around like crazy. The only downside to fishing this frog, besides the fact that snakeheads love them out here on the Potomac, is that big bass and big violent strikes can tear up these rabbit fur legs a little bit more quickly than they will standard rubber. But it's really easy to replace any frog legs. There's a myriad of videos. Just look up one of Fred Rumbanis's videos on how he replaces frog legs, because he does it all the time. It's not hard to do. So with a rabbit strip, it's pretty easy. You just need like a bobbin and just to push it through and bring out the other side and pull, and you're done. So again, a very unique frog, something that most frogs in the country, or most bass in the country, have not seen before. And one thing we know about new baits that are very, that if bass hasn't seen them, they're not conditioned to them. They tend to be a little bit more aggressive and more consistently striking them. So regular version up top, popping version on the bottom. Awesome frog, a little bit bigger than most, but again, really unique action. This is kind of a secret weapon for me. I debated not putting this up here, but hey guys, Navionics wants to make sure you guys have all of the information that we can provide to you, so I put it out there for you. This is the Depths Bass Risky. It is a very unique kind of. It almost looks like it's a swimming duck is the only thing I can really compare it to. It's got like a duck waddle to it, and it's got a single hook. And when you fish this, you would fish it. You'd cast it out, let it hit the water, let the ripples disappear, and then very slowly with the rod tip down, just very slowly reel back to you. And what will happen is that each one of these legs, this body will kind of waddle side to side, and each one of these legs will dip into water for a second, and it'll kind of look like almost like it's paddling right back to you. This is for whatever reason, this is a real big fish attractor on tidal fisheries. This is great if you're fishing grass beds or you're fishing pads fields where you have large breaks in the middle of the pad field or the grass field, or there's just like a large open area. Making this thing swim across that open area at a slow speed is almost agonizing to watch as an angler, but it really can be infuriating for the bass. And you will get some huge, violent strikes on this. I will own, for whatever reason, I've only used black. They make them in several different colors. I just think black has a great profile with this. It's easy for me to see. You don't have to worry as much as seeing the bait on this one because you're constantly moving it, so it's constantly creating a wake for you in that little paddling motion. It'll create a noise as well. The only thing that I will caution when it comes to depth bass are risky because they're not cheap. There's a lot going into making of this. Is that you got to store them properly. When you store them properly, you can't have the legs bent or folded or compressed in any way because if they will eventually stay that way, and then that'll mess up the action of your frog. And unlike the other frogs, you cannot replace these legs. Live target frog. Again, this is a very realistic looking frog. These are the frogs that I would have to take and actually make little marks on the bottom. They're pretty plain on the bottom. They do have some models like this brown and black that'll have some marking on the bottom. The legs are a little bit longer than I prefer, but it's real easy. I just trim them 1/2 inch to 1 inch, and they're right where I want them to be. As good as this frog is, this can become a suicide frog pretty quickly. So keep an eye on it, and if it starts putting holes in the top of it, that frog's going to be done for the day. You can go home, you can coat it with, you can coat the holes with super glue and take it back out again, but it's never going to be quite the same, and you're going to constantly having to make repairs to it. It's an excellent frog. It's particularly good for pressured fish because they do make some smaller sizes. And this frog's actually got a really kind of unique porpoising action, and you can pop it back to you, and it'll almost like come out like it'll kind of skim across the water like a porpoise, like almost like a half popper. So like you'll pull on it, and it'll go down and back up, down and back up, down and back up, which is a pretty unique action. And that's what you're looking for with frogs, is you're looking for something that's going to be a unique action. Alrighty, so I know it seems like a lot. But each one of those things has a little bit different aspect or attribute to it that might trigger a bite during that day. For the most part, 90% of the time, I will have a spro popping frog and that evolved nervous walker on, and that's what I will. That's how I'll start eliminating my choices. And if they aren't working, I will go to the Optimum Baits Farbit Frog because that lifelike back leg action can really trigger strikes when other things won't. Now, the big question then becomes, when do we start to throw frogs? Well, I'm going to tell you, for as soon as possible and for as long as possible, you should be frog fishing. The key for you is going to be when the water temperature hits 60 degrees, which means this is a post-spawn deal. This is if, during the spawn, pre-spawn, I am sure you can throw frogs and be successful with them somewhere in the country. There's too many other things that have proven to be good spawn, pre-spawn patterns to not worry about throwing a frog at that time. And really, until the water's 60 degrees, the frog isn't going to be coming out of his hidey hole to come play out in the woods anyway. So when you start hearing spring peepers and then you start going to water temperatures, 58, 59, 60 degrees, you can start throwing a frog with some confidence that the bass are going to be able to come up and look for it. When you fish frogs, cloudy is the best. Bass become less skittish when the sun's not pushing right down on them because now under the water, things aren't as clear, so they feel a little bit more comfortable. Bass are always looking for shade. So when the clouds are providing that for them, they tend to be a little bit more bold and they roam a little more and they go looking for eats a little bit more. But you can consider the use of a frog all summer long, regardless of the conditions and around any structure, and you can be successful. Now, we're going to go into that a little bit where. Again, there's the picture of the grass beds from Gunnersville. Where do you want to fish for frogs? In grass beds, you want to throw it in there as deep as possible, and you want that frog to spend a lot of time in natural holes that are formed within the grass beds. Everything in nature is, nothing's ever uniform, whether it be the frog itself or the grass bed that you are going to be fishing. So look for the irregularities, look for the channels. When you see this little area right here, that's most likely where somebody went in on their trolling motor and was trying to fish this grass bed to get all the way back to these trees. But half an hour, 30 minutes, an hour later, this is not a bad area to throw that frog. It's going to be a natural break. It's going to be a cut in the grass line. So those bass will be sitting on those edges looking up to see what they can find. It's a great place to throw that frog. Same thing in pad fields. I really prefer to fish pad fields over grass. I actually like I actually kind of like a combination of the two. I prefer a pad field that's surrounded by grass, which is when that video I showed you on the James, that was what that was. And again, spend time in the natural holes. You can pretty much move that bait pretty quickly through the denser areas, but once you get to some place that's wide open, slow down. Give everybody time to find it. Because when you think about it, if you're throwing it up really close and real heavy stuff, or you're throwing it in real heavy pads, it's very difficult for your quarry to go ahead and pick out whatever it is that you're throwing because there's so much in the way. But and this is why bass sit on those break lines, and when it comes to structure, once it leaves that thick stuff, now it's a little bit more open, everything's more vulnerable, those bass are more apt to ambush. Docks. These are wonderful tools to skip around docks. Now, it's difficult to skip with a bait caster, but with some practice, I firmly believe anybody can do it. And the thing about frogs that's really great is they skip extremely well because they're designed to sit up top anyway. They're made out of hollow plastic. They'll bounce right off the water and skip all the way back, and you're going to want to throw it as far back as you can. Most docks have not seen a frog skipped underneath it, which means that the resident fish that sit there are going to jump at the chance to hit that. And then any other object that a frog may have fallen from in nature is a good place to throw a frog. The same areas that you're going to flip to, you can throw a frog to and be successful. And you may actually want to throw that frog right up on that log or right up on that dock and kind of slowly pop it off, just like a frog naturally would fall from there. But then again, like I told you before, and this is Chickamuxon Creek here on the Potomac River. It's one of my favorite places to go frog fishing. Typically, this whole entire area is just choked out with grass. So what you want to look at is you see from these contour lines. This is off the Navionics web app. So it'll show you the contour lines when you click on this button. It'll show you the sonar chart. You want to look when all this grass is uniform and it's all the way across. You want to look for the irregularities underneath the grass that's where the fish are going to hold. So if you've got just one big flat spot and then you've got a rise or a drop or even a bigger hole here, that might be where you want to concentrate because that's good. Fish are going to hold on changes in contour. So make sure you're checking your maps and make sure you're looking at your maps when you're out there. Even if it's just a big grass field, it's not as important, but it might be the key to put you to that little area where they're all going to be concentrated, such as this right here. I just gave you a spot. So you Potomac fishermen, if you see me out there and you see me there, make sure you say hi. How? Again, slow, 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 slow. When you think that you've waited long enough, wait 5 more seconds. You cannot get too slow with a frog. You're going to want to, for those of you just starting, you want to fish these rod tip down. You do not want to fish it rod tip up for the most part. Now you can, and it's a little bit more tricky, but it's easier to impart walking action and popping action to a frog when you have your rod tip down. You're going to want to vary your pauses in the retrieve. One of the things that people get caught up in and one of the mistakes they can make is they can get very rhythmic with their topwater fishing. That can be disastrous. I don't want to say that might be a little bit too extreme, but that can certainly lessen your chances of catching fish or lessen the number of fish that you're catching because, again, nothing in nature is predictable. So when you're doing 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3, pause, and you've had a fish that's looking at it for a while and he sees that it's rhythmic and that it's the same thing every time, he might get spooked. So try to make it look like it's actually a frog that's struggling and has kind of had that, oh boy moment, I'm not in a good spot, I might want to move. action to it, okay? You're going to want to cast as far as possible, which means when using your bait caster, you are going to need to really open up the braking system a lot to maximize the distance. Um, and that can cause backlashes for you. It's gonna take some time, but the frog's heavy enough that it can handle that opening. What I suggest you do is open up the main brake, the brake that's next to the actual drag and the actual handle a lot, and then use the magnetic brake on the opposite side of the handle. Kind of tighten that down a little more because you're going to find that it's the end of the cast that's going to cause the most of the line to uh, sort of bird nest for you. So if you can brake towards the end instead of at the beginning, typically you'll have less backlashes. Um, when a bass hits a frog, uh, there's a lot of theories out there, guys. Some guys will tell you, well, count to two before you hit them. Some guys will say, nope, whack them right away. I have always found that just like fishing a Senko, the best thing for you to do, the best hookup ratio comes when a bass takes that frog down, is that you reel until you feel the fish, and then you whack them. Reel till you feel, then whack them. It's a good practice because if you don't get excited watching a bass take a topwater frog, I have some serious concerns about you. You might want to go to the hospital, have yourself checked out because your heart rate should be going through the roof. It's one of the most exciting things in bass fishing, in my opinion. Just watch a big fish come up and annihilate a frog, and then you're like, oh man, what do I do? Reel till you feel, then whack them. And the reason why I want that to do that, guys, is that sometimes these fish will hit the frog and then immediately spit it out to stun it because they think it's a live thing. And then they'll come back and pick up an easy meal. And if you yank it out of their face right away or yank it out right away, it's gone. And that fish is immediately, 9 times out of 10, that fish is going to just bail. He's going to roll out. When you do your hook set, I suggest that you do what Kevin Van Dam does. If you ever watch the Kevin Van Dam fish, you've noticed when he sets the hook, he'll always walk away from he like walks back his boat, or he walks back on his boat deck, and he's doing that for a couple of reasons. It helps with his hook set. It helps bury the hook for him, but if it's also pulling that fish up, and because we're fishing in areas that are going to be usually heavy weeds, heavy pads, heavy structure, we want to get that fish out of there as quickly as possible. When you frog fish and you're using 65 to 80 pound line, you whack that fish and you get it up and out of there and in the boat as quickly as you can. It's not finesse fishing. We don't want to mess with them. So I say I found the best success when you hit him with that hook set, you immediately start walking back. Give him a good 2 or 3 steps that'll get him up and running to you, and then you just reel him in as fast as you can. It's also very imperative that you do not sweep set with frogs. Frogs got the hooks up top. We want to hit the top of the mouth. You need to come directly over your head when you do a hook set with the frog. If you do it from the side, you can pull it out of that fish's face. So step back on the hook set, walk away from it. If you're fishing from the shore, you can do the same thing, just walk away. It gets that bass coming up and out of the crap. And then get that fish up on the top of the water as fast as you can and reel him to the boat as fast as you can and just boat flip him in. This is going to take some time. Heavier fish might not be able to do that. I still suggest that you get that fish to the boat as quickly as you can. Either get a hand on him or get a net on him as fast as possible. Again, the reason why I suggest getting him up and walking him in is you're fishing heavy nonsense. If you give him a chance to get back down in it, you're giving him a chance to get away. So get him up, skim him across the top, or get him to the boat as quickly as you can and put him in the boat. And then again, you saw what happened when I moved the grass off that fish's head in the video beginning. He started flipping out. I could have lost him at that point if that was it. You always lose fish in a tournament, never in practice, guys. So if that was tournament day, I probably would have lost him. But leave the grass on his head, get him in the boat, and then take the grass off of his face or the pads or whatever he's got on his head. If you're out there fishing and you get a short strike or a tail pull, sometimes you'll just see the back of your frog get popped down and popped down. 9 times out of 10, that's a bluegill. But sometimes some bigger fish will pop, will do that, or they're just not committing to it fully. They'll come up with a swirl on the back of it and go back down. When that happens, switch to a popper. Gives it a little bit more noise. You can keep in that area a little bit longer, or switch to that furbit frog. That furbit frog will encourage finicky fish to come and hit it when they see that movement. Bigger bass, when they take a frog down, will do what we call a toilet bowl flush. There will not be a whole lot of fanfare to it. It will not be a big smash. You will not see the fish come flying out of the water typically, because that's an apex predator that's just going to come up. It's going to open up its mouth, cause a huge vacuum, and kind of suck that fish back down. So you've got to pay attention when you're fishing your frog. I can tell you, I fished a couple of tournaments off the back of other people's boats when I was starting out, and we're having a conversation and we're throwing frogs, and I'm just sitting there talking to the guy, and he looks out in the water and he just said to me, "Dude, where's your frog?" And I had no idea where it was, so I reeled until I felt. Sure enough, I had a fish on there, whacked him, brought him into the boat. But if that had kept on going, he probably would have spit it out and just called it a day, and I never would have known he was on there. Always set the hook straight back, guys. Straight over your head, straight back. Don't sweep them. If you sweep to the side, you can pull it out sideways. If you miss a strike and you happen to go ahead and you set the hook and you pop it out of his mouth, get the frog back to you as quickly as you can and throw it right back in there. And also have a follow-up bait ready. I will always have a Senko tied onto my boat at all times. There's not a single place in the country you can't catch fish on a Senko. You follow the 4-second rule. If I can get another bait back in there in 4 seconds, do it. If not, you might want to let that little area that he was in chill for a couple of minutes and then throw it back to him. You can either throw the frog right back in there, or you can throw that Senko back in there as long as it's within 4 seconds. A fish that comes up and misses a frog, if you throw a Senko to him, it'll go down the water a bit. He will react to it and he can whack them. Just remember that you're probably going to want to have braid with that Senko and some type of fluorocarbon leader, 17 to 20 pound, because of what you're fishing and where you're fishing in. It's going to get a little nasty. And we're at 8 o'clock, guys, but I'm going to keep on going. I don't have much more. So, but 4-second rule is a big deal. If it goes more than 4 seconds, guys, my suggestion: mark it. Remember where it is. Give it a couple minutes. Come right back. Keep an eye on it. Come right back. Frogs are big fish baits, and while they can produce large fish, you're not going to get a lot of numbers. I know I've said this a couple of times, but I really want to impart this to everyone. When you fish frogs, you kind of got to commit to them. And don't expect to get blasted. Now, you may have, you have plenty of times out there you'll have those magical 20, 30 fish days on frogs and everything's fine, and we're high-fiving each other, and, life is wonderful on those days. Those are few and far between. Tournament fishermen in particular, if you're going to throw the frog and you're going to commit to it, plan on 5 bites and know that your 5 bites are probably going to be bigger than everybody else's. There's no real hard and fast rules as to when and how you should change. I've given you some basic guidelines as to how to choose and what to choose and where to throw them, but you really need to let the fish tell you what they want. If you aren't seeing a whole lot of topwater action and the conditions are kind of like high stress conditions, like post frontal, bluebird skies, super bright, you may want to put the frog down and go to something else. Go to your plan B, and usually in the areas that you're going to be frog fishing, your plan B is going to be dragging a Senko or flipping something else to those pads or that grass, something that's going to punch through. Stressful conditions, most of the fish are going to sit at or near the bottom, and you're going to have to really kind of put it right on their face in order to get them into the boat. High sun, no frog bites means that bass are on the bottom, so you're gonna want to head and flip something to them. And then the same thing if it's too choppy. If there's a lot of chop out there, you got 2 choices. If you got a lot of waves out there, you can either A, go somewhere where there's not a lot of waves, find some protected cove, and hope that there's some structure you can flip a frog to, which there will be, or B, flip something else. Go under. You're going to have to get down underneath. So again, a flipping bait would be key. And that is it for Froggin Dirty, which is just pretty much my choices and how I handle things and what I'm thinking about when I'm out there fishing. There is my contact information: C. Murphy at Navionics, Chris at basseast.com, and my website murphangler.com. Please, if you have any questions or if there's something I didn't cover for you that you want to ask me, please go ahead and send me an email with that question. I usually get back to people within 24 hours at the latest. And I love to hear from you. I love to hear questions, or if you've got some suggestions of things that you do with frogs that are different or something I didn't cover today, please share it with me so I can share it with everybody else. I'm a big proponent of taking the information that I have and sharing it with other people, getting them involved in a sport. And heck, you can stand right next to me, fish right next to me, and we'll see which, the challenge is. Let's see which one of us is better that day. I think it's like, I'm a competitor. I played college sports. It's fun for me to do that. And when I get beat, and I do get beat quite often, hats off to them. So that's part of the fun of this whole game. It's us against the fish. It's us against each other, but we're really all in it together. Yep, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my webinar today. Navionics is going to have more webinars going throughout the year. So head over to navionics.com and check on the webinar schedule. There's stuff from fishing and sailing and navigation, all the way to fishing, to basic boating, using your electronics. And I know they got another one coming up on using your Lowrance to find fish coming up soon. So check out the different webinars from navionics.com. Pay attention to us on Facebook. And thank you once again, guys. I hope to hear from some of you via email. I believe we have a question here. Let's see here. We got several. Audio is great. Do I use trailer hooks from Ken Weber? I do sometimes, but for the most part, I find that they can cause more problems than they can solve. And it's just a single trailer hook, and sometimes that'll get hooked up on weeds, and then you're dragging a frog with weeds, and that doesn't look natural. So I don't really use a whole lot of trailer hooks. I will, if I'm getting short strikes, I'll change up my frog. I'll either change it to something smaller, or I'll change up to another version, either a popper, or if I'm using a popper, I'll go to a walker. If I'm using a walker, I'll go to a popper. Joe, what kind of knot do you use to tie the braid and get the best action from the frogs? I tie a knot that's called the uni knot. I learned it when I was a fly fishing guide, and we call it the Duncan loop. But I use the uni knot because of two reasons. One, it's pretty simple. Number two, it's self-tightening, which means the more that fish pulls on there, the more the knot actually tightens. It's a great braid knot. I can't think of a single time where I've broken it using braid. It's pretty easy tutorials out there for it online. It's pretty simple to use. If fishing a weedy lake in New York, for example, that has toothy northern pike or chain pickerel, and I hate those things, that will slice the line when they hit it, would you recommend a leader? And if so, made from wire or from fluorocarbon line, and what pound match the braided line? Okay. I would never suggest using wire leader in freshwater, particularly with a frog. It's going to really drastically affect the action of the frog, and I don't think it's necessary. We have snakehead here, and if I had been thinking, I would have put a picture of a snakehead that I had caught on a furbit out here in the Potomac, that are about as toothy as it gets. I have never had one break off my braid when using 680 pound. However, one of the things that I used to target as a fly fisherman was muskie on the river, and what we would do is we would take 50-pound fluorocarbon and just straight use that as our leader material. However, 50-pound fluorocarbon with a frog is going to be, for bass, is going to be a little bit of overkill. So if you got a lot, and we do have chain pickerel here, and we got gar here as well, but we don't have, and I don't think we have any pike in the areas that we're doing our bass tournaments. But my suggestion would be, again, 65 to 80-pound braid, and then maybe a 3 or 4 foot, well, not 4 foot, 3 foot section of 20-pound fluorocarbon. 20-pound would be the most. That's good. That's a pretty strong fluorocarbon. And if I find myself in an area with a lot of pike, I'm going to leave. So I know I've never fished the Finger Lakes. I've fished up there for during the steelhead run, but never for bass. I'm a southern fisherman for the most part, but I would do what we used to do. I do actually a lot of my topwater stuff. Even when I'm using popwaters and walkers, I'll use braid, and then I will use a fluorocarbon leader. People say like, well, doesn't fluorocarbon sink? Yeah, but it does. But when you're using a very small, like 2.5, 3 foot section, it doesn't really sink much at all. So it doesn't really affect it too much, and it gives you a little bit more durability. I hope that everybody was able to see it. Some guys were able to. Um, some people had no sound. I'm sorry about that, guys. On my end, everything's showing that it's okay, and I hope that even though you weren't able to hear or see, I know the recording's coming up, and like I told you, we'll have the YouTube channel coming out. Let me see. What kind of knot do I use? Thank you. Do you direct tie your braid or uni short length of fluoro as a leader? I will. Yeah, actually, for you can do uni to uni for your fluorocarbon to braid connection. I found that it's just as easy and quicker to just do a triple surgeons for your fluorocarbon to um, your braid, or you can do what's called an Alberto knot. Alberto knot though takes some getting used to, but a triple surgeons is very quick and very effective. But for the most part, I don't bother with leaders when it comes to frog. I'll just direct tie braid right to the frog. Do I use a hydrowave while frogging? If so, what sound do you recommend? Yes, I do use. I use a hydrowave all the time while frogging, and I will use um, Feeding Frenzy Continuous when I am using my hydrowave while frog fishing. That was from Gordon Hartle. Um, do I put anything on the line in front of the frog to stop grass buildup, such as a bead? No, I don't. I know some people do. I just like a clean loop or a clean knot right to that front, and then I'll just. I wish I could say I pick it out and I actually that I actually clean it off, but I don't. I just once it gets back to the boat, if I see there's stuff on there, I'll just keep whacking it on the water until it all that stuff comes off. But for the most part, I don't really have that much of a problem with it because you're skirting it around or over. And I answered your question, Paul. Good. Do I lock down the drag on the Tatala from Michael Chang? Yes, I do. I will, for almost all of my power fishing stuff, I don't really keep a whole lot of drag going on. But particularly when it comes to frog fishing, I will crank that thing down until, oops, excuse me, before they drop my microphone. I will crank down the drag, Michael, on my Tatala when frog fishing as far as it will go. I do not need any drag. I need all the power I can get because, like I said, I'm trying to whack this fish and bring it all the way up. If I catch a lot of small fish, do you think that it could be better to change spots? It could. Bass, when you find a certain class of bass all hanging around, um, you there's always going to be one or two bigger ones most likely in there. They just might not be interested in what you're doing. If I'm finding a lot of smaller class fish, then yes, I will move somewhere else or move 100, 200 yards down the same spot until I find out where those bigger ones are holding. Paul, you opened it in the video as miraculous restored. Awesome to hear, Paul. I was kind of worried about that. I think that's all the questions that I can see. Do I put anything? Thanks again, guys, for taking your time to just hang out with me tonight. Send any questions I didn't cover to my email address, and everybody have a fantastic night. Thank you very much.